Hi, welcome to the Cinematography Salon podcast, a show about celebrating cinematography and inspiring both the current and next generation of visual artists, exploring the latest trends, techniques, technologies, and culture, and featuring exclusive interviews with some of the most talented and innovative cinematographers working today. Hello everyone, my name is Peter Pascucci, and I'm here again with Oren Soffer, and this week we are super excited to have the incredibly talented actress Mackenzie Lansing with us. Mackenzie is a French-American film and television actress, and we'd like to hear a little bit about your journey to becoming an actress and what it was like growing up in a small town outside of Paris and sort of where your interest in the craft originated.
I think mostly from being a kid who wasn't good at much else. I grew up in France, and you don't have like extracurriculars like as a part of school. Like you don't really have clubs or anything, so it's kind of a standard thing that you have to be good at something outside of like academics. I tried gymnastics, lots of dancing, really bad at dancing. I don't know, I was pretty shy, and I think theater was like the one thing that sort of stuck. My parents were also like pretty religious back in the day, and I remember seeing like a rendition in Paris of like the Prince of Egypt, and the kid on stage was like my age or whatever. It's like told from the point of view of an 11-year-old, and I was like, oh, whatever he's doing, like I want to do that. Like I want to wear costumes and run around. It resonated with me because I'd never seen like a live performance of anything before, and so I was like crying by the end, and I think my family thought I was like really moved by Christ, but really I was just so excited for, I don't know, to discover that maybe that could be a job. Like I always put on like shows with my sisters and like put on tons of costumes and stuff like that, and I was like, can I like continue doing this for the rest of my life? I definitely had Peter Pan syndrome, like never want to grow up, so it kind of felt like a hack out of adulthood.
I think everybody in film has a little bit of that.
Yes.
Because there is something that is sort of innately like make-believey about filmmaking. Like that's the whole thing, is like we're all just playing with, toy trucks in our sandbox, like to this day. That's how I feel.
Yeah, that's exactly what it's like. And I think people sometimes forget about that when they're talking to like crew and everybody else. It's like we all saw a movie or a piece one day that like, I don't know, that blew us away, and that was like, oh, how can I be a part of that magic? I can't remember who said this, but it was like, there's something about filmmaking that's so attractive where it's like you're seeing magic for the first time, and you're like, oh, I can be a part of that. And then everybody kind of shuffles around and finds their place in that, whether it's like acting or directing or being behind the camera or whatever.
So how do you go from somebody who's interested in acting as a kid to like, I'm going to pursue this professionally? Like, what does that transition look like for an actor? Because obviously as DPs, I think we're all very familiar with that storyline. Like usually you end up going to film school or making movies with your friends and stuff like that, and that like slowly just becomes more and more professional. But like, what does it look like for actors like to make that decision to go, I'm going to be a professional now, I'm going to pursue this actually as my career?
Oh, you have to be really delusional. Like delusion is very powerful. So like when I say that, I don't necessarily mean it in like a bad way, but it is an insane thing to decide to do. And I don't know, I know I was only 11, but I kind of felt like I was floating through life, and when I encountered acting, I felt like that was like my purpose and what I wanted to do, and then my whole life became about like, how do I accomplish this dream, which, requires being a little bit delusional, and I think that that's something that you have to embrace right away or not. You know what I mean? Like you have to kind of immediately be like, okay, I'm gonna believe in this and set myself on this track. And that takes a little bit of accepting that you might fail. And I think that's the hardest part for people, is like you could dedicate your life or part of your life to something and it not work out. So, and the other thing I've been thinking a lot recently actually with the strike is how you do kind of decide to be an actor in a vacuum. Like what you said, like you start collaborating, like even though I think that part of the reason I fell in love with acting for real later on was collaboration, initially you are kind of just making that decision by yourself.
Right.
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense.
I mean, initially when you set out to do this, you touched on your parents a little bit, but what did you receive any pushback on this choice to kind of, when you became interested in theater and everything, what was that journey like?
Yeah, I think I was extremely fortunate in the sense that like, well, one, I was a very shy but very stubborn child, so I think my parents kind of knew if my mind was made up, there wasn't much you were going to be able to do about it. And I think they always were like, well, if she finds something else that she likes more along the way, she'll do that instead. So no, I actually didn't get a ton of pushback. I was very lucky in that sense.
I love that. It's so impressive that you've been able to perform along pretty huge name actors like Maggie Gyllenhaal and Kate Winslet, and must have been a pretty wild experience. So what was it like kind of working with people at that caliber, and how did it kind of influence you?
You know what's really funny is I found that when I was growing up in France, like I only hung out with guys, like that was my thing. And then somehow in the film industry, I kept ending up with these like powerhouse women who like took me under their wing. And that was extremely revolutionary for me as a person, not just like being able to watch someone like be an absolute master at their craft and want to teach me, because both of those women did that for me on set, but also feeling like there were other people like me out there who were like consummately obsessed with their passion and who had made it happen. And that was really inspiring, especially Kate Winslet was absolutely lovely to me and taught me a lot and like took on kind of a role of mentor while we were working together.
Kate has always been my favorite actress, like ever since I was a kid.
You can't tell me anything about her. I will not hear a bad word about her. And that was previously to meeting her, and now I'm even more convinced that she's perfect.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think like Eternal Sunshine is my favorite movie of all time.
Me too.
Yeah,
It's a perfect movie.
It's a perfect movie.
It's a perfect movie.
It's a perfect movie. And it came along, for me at least, it came along like just at the right time. I was like a moody high schooler, like very emo, and then this movie comes out that's like very melancholy, and it's just perfect.
You know, I was able to talk to her about that movie. I was saving it because like I was like, I don't want to like do that thing where I meet her. I'm pretty good around like big. I don't like get shaking in my boots, but still, Kate was like big for me growing up. I remember watching Eternal Sunshine was the first time I saw somebody like that I felt was like me on screen, like had a weird hair color and didn't fit in, and also was just a complicated character, like the kinds of characters that I wanted to play. And we built this relationship, and then the last day filming, when they called a wrap on my character, I started crying, and Kate ran over and like held me and was like, you know, said lots of nice things that I will say for myself into my ear. But then I was able to say to her, like, I was like, I want you to know that your role in Eternal Sunshine changed my life. And it's the reason I'm standing here today. And she just went, oh, darling. Which I'm still not sure what that means, but it was cool to actually be able to tell her that how much that movie had meant to me.
I love that. Yeah, because the intonation of that could also be like, they're there. That's nice.
I think it was a bit of both. I think it was like, it's definitely something she's heard before, I'm sure. But like once I heard that Kate used to like hold a shampoo bottle, like that was where I think where the obsession came from, is I started modeling myself after people like her, where she was like, I used to like, this used to be a shampoo bottle, you know, in my shower when she was talking about winning an Academy Award. Do you know what I'm talking about? I was like, oh, I should start doing that. So I was like 14, like doing the same thing, because I was like, clearly it worked for her. So maybe like there's something to this, you know?
Totally. It's manifestation. It's like, that's how it works, right? I love that. Mackenzie, I was really excited to have you on because obviously the timeliness of having an actor on the show is very prescient with the ongoing strike, and you've acted in some really exciting and cool upcoming projects that we unfortunately can't talk about because of the strike. With regards to that, as a working actress, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about the strike in general. Like, what is your sort of big picture view on the current state of the SAG-AFTRA strike and how it pertains to you?
It was sort of a relief to hear someone in a position of power resonate some things that I've been feeling, or I've noticed other people being treated unfairly. We were kind of finally banding together and recognizing that this was a thing, because I think, just going back to what I was saying earlier, like I think sometimes we forget as actors about the collaboration aspect of this industry, or when we do, unfortunately, sometimes we focus too much on the networking aspect and we don't think about how we are in this with a bunch of other actors. And I think that it's convenient for the system that we are against each other in a lot of situations, or framed against each other. And I think that seeing everybody come together, and even just big stars being way more on, because I've heard stories on set, you know, from people who, you know, after doing a huge Netflix show have had to go back to a bartending job. And I've experienced stuff like that too. So to hear people finally coming out and talking about openly things that I think that a lot of us as actors were just sort of going about pretending like we're all doing great because that's what we're expected to do. Like there isn't a struggle. And you know, to some extent, the struggle is a part of this profession, and I understand that. But there are certain ways in which we're being treated that are new. Like we reached a contract years ago during the 80s, the last time we went on strike, and that's how we got our residuals. And those residuals are what sustained actors. Like my teachers and coaches had big gaps in between projects, and because of those residuals, were able to support themselves and their families. And I've seen the difference, in shows that I've had that originally are on network end up going to streaming like a year later, and then you don't see any more residuals from that.
Yeah.
And so something that might have sustained you for a whole year only sustains you for like a couple months.
Right.
Wow, yeah. There's so much nuance to it too. Like I've heard that maybe they don't want like huge celebrity actors to be the figureheads of the strike because then it does give off that feeling that like actors are privileged. I totally understand and like agree with this idea that it's just important for everyone to come together and represent each other and like band together. But I'm just curious like how you react to that view as well.
I totally understand it, and I agree with both sides because I think, you've got to understand that I think a lot of the celebrities, like Bryan Cranston, for instance, who spoke today in Times Square, who are coming forward, it's not for them. Like, they're doing fine. They're going to have projects. This is what's unprecedented about this, is that they are doing it out of, in part, not only, but in part, in solidarity to all of us who are struggling. Because they know that when they started out, the business has always been hard, but it's much harder now.
Yeah.
And I think that as an actor, would I love to hear more from people who are struggling, sort of middle-range actors? Sure. But is it going to attract the public eye more if we have people like Fran Drescher and Bryan Cranston talking? Like, yes, it's going to make more of an impact, but I would love to see both.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think it's been so interesting. There was always this myth of what Hollywood is and like what movie making is and what it entails. It's maybe created this like false idea of what like hard work in the film industry entails and how even actors go through a lot of that hard work. Even just on this podcast, like talking to other DPs and other creatives, like there's always stories about those struggles and about career growth and everything. But it's something that I think because of that mythos around celebrities and actors especially, like you miss that side of it. So it's been really interesting to see, and I think probably healthy in the long term to see that myth like dispelled a little bit and to see like big celebrities on the picket lines and doing these speeches and saying like, yeah, I mean, listen, I was there too. Like I understand these struggles and I'm not going through them now. I did. And that makes me understand what people are going through now. And like we all have to understand that like there is this other side of it that is coming to light, that maybe like this is a really important conversation that we should all be having.
Yeah, I've always been a little bit confused by why people are so obsessed with the overnight success story because 9 times out of 10 it's not true.
Yeah.
Like it's completely false, Like I've seen it happen with actor friends of mine. We come up together. I've seen them struggle, and then they'll get a role on Grey's Anatomy or whatever, and they're like out of nowhere, Midori Francis, who's a fantastic actress.
Yeah.
But it's like, no, like that's somebody who worked really hard to get where they were. And I saw them at all the audition calls and like all this stuff. And it's just interesting how we simplify it.
I think that's like a really good segue into a question that I'm personally really curious about. As I've been following the conversation around the WGA and SAG-AFTRA strikes, it feels like with people outside of our industry, I feel like there tends to be somewhat of like a little bit of condescension toward actors and actresses. And it's sort of this idea that like their role in society is maybe frivolous. I respect the craft of acting like so much. And at school, when I went to NYU, there was like one semester class that Oren and I probably both had to take.
Yep,
but
I had to take that too.
Even that window into it was like so inspiring, and it really like helped me realize like what that emotional work requires. And so I just love for you to tell us your thoughts on kind of dispelling the myth that actors are all famous or celebrity millionaires, and also just what the average person can learn from the process and the emotional work that an actor goes through.
I think that there's a lot of assumption that anyone can do it. And like to a certain extent, that's like sort of true. Like the basis of acting is what? Like memorizing lines and showing up. But we're talking about treating this as like a craft and like a calling, and therefore like something that, and that might sound like a dramatic word, a calling, but I guess something that you're always trying to get better at even when no one's looking. It takes a lot of, like you said, like emotional investigation, a lot of training, a lot of work, a lot of like getting to know yourself and constantly trying to evolve and be better. But there's also like a huge part of this is a business and an industry, and you do have to have like kind of a brain for both.
I mean, I think for me too, like part of the reason for asking it is I think it also ties into like queer identity a little bit to some extent. For me personally, coming out, it did require like discovering who I am, and I imagine that becoming an actor involves a lot of that reflection too, and like looking at yourself and really trying to like get familiar with who you are. And I think in so many industries, that's not a priority of like many professions or people's agenda, is to like actually get a full sense of who they are. And I imagine, you know, from the incredible work you've done, it seems like you're either on the path or absolutely have a sense of who you are. And I think it's really beautiful. And I just would love to hear a little bit about like what that journey was like.
It's hard, man. Like I heard once when I was starting out that it takes 20 years to be an actor. And what I mean by that is like, it's still hard. You still like struggle with the material. Yeah, I think that's also one thing people don't realize is like how much time, if you're really committed to this, you spend like agonizing over a script and not worrying about just getting it good enough, but worrying about making it the best it could possibly be, which really requires challenging ideas that you have about life, assumptions that you have about people, reading between the lines, understanding subtext, like all of that stuff, which for me is honestly one of my favorite parts. But it is just like any other art form, it's very frustrating. Like art is created through struggle. And I think that that's true whether you're in front of the camera or behind the camera or writing a script. Like a lot of writers will tell you, I don't like the part where I actually have to write. Mm-hmm. I sort of get what they mean in the sense that like when you're working on a script, if you're doing it right, there should be a point where you like throw it against the wall or rip up the piece of paper that you're working on because you're just like, like I'm not getting it. I'm not getting where I want to be. And that does require constantly putting feelers out for, I don't know, how you've changed, who you are as a person. Because if you don't know yourself, I don't think you can expect to ever really know a character. And that's a moving target too, which is difficult.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that's so interesting. On the topic of the craft of acting, something that always interests me when talking to actors about this is understanding how you reconcile the artificiality of film production with the aspiration to create an authentic and lived-in performance on screen. So, like, does it help or hurt you to understand, for example, like, what's the shot size? Like, where is the camera in relation to me? Like, what is the frame? Or to accept like restrictive blocking, you know, that's necessary to get like a certain shot that the director really wants. Like, well, I really need to get this moment, so I need you to hit this exact mark and the timing right. Or like, are you able to block out that artificiality somehow and still focus on the authenticity of the performance? Like, how does that all reconcile for you?
I mean, I love it. And I'm really glad you asked that question because I think that when people are like, oh, I hate the camera being so close to my face or having to stand in this blocking, I'm like, then do theater. Theater's great. Theater's also really hard in its own regard, by the way. But I'm just saying that like filmmaking is negotiating all of these aspects, and it's actually the thing I think that excites me the most because if, you know, the director suddenly needs me to cry on cue in a different moment, I have to do like rapid math in my head to be like, how do I justify in my character being able to cry this early? What do I change about the subtext of what the other person's saying, or what do I feel in this moment, or how do I tweak my previous circumstance? Like all of that is, I find really exhilarating because it's such a challenge and you have to do it fast.
So cool. I feel like all three of us are obsessed with our craft, and I love that about all of us.
I love that about us.
But it's so interesting because there's different actors that will have a completely different answer to this question. Yes. And I mean, you know, all one needs to do to understand like how some other actors react to this is like listen to Christian Bale's
I know
infamous rant, in which again it's one of those things where I've always been like, I get where he's coming from.
Sure, yeah.
He's acting, he's doing an intense role, performing an intense scene, and you know, some crew members like walking around in the background, like in his eye line in the middle of a take. Like, of course that would be distracting and I would probably get pissed off. I mean, it's probably not the way to express it, but we've all been on set. Like people get tense and it can be a very intense experience and sparks fly and et cetera, not justifying anything. And then there's also this story that I always think about, which is on Gone Baby Gone. Ben Affleck's directing his brother, Casey, and it's like their first day, first scene. And they're framed up on this shot of like a hallway. And then I guess he didn't really give much direction because Casey Affleck, I guess, doesn't want a lot of direction. And so Ben was like, okay, action. And then Casey like walks into a room that's like off camera. Like he's walking down the hallway and then just like walks into a room and then like does the scene in the room. And then he's like, Ben Affleck's like, okay, cut. Like, all right, so this, like, that's great. I'm glad that your instinct was to go into that room, but like, we need you on camera. Like we still, like we need you to find a way to, you know, like I want to give you the space to find the scene and act and like live in the moment. but also it needs to be in front of the camera. So like, and it's just interesting how people navigate that. Like how, I don't know. It's very interesting to me.
Yeah, one of the first lessons I learned on set was like, I can't remember what it was on, but I was on something with a big actor, and it was like one of my first like TV roles. And we did this scene, and like we kept doing it, and I was like giving 100% every single take. And this actor's just phoning it in, this star. And I was like, come on, dude, like I'm giving you my heart and soul here. And then finally they were like, that's it on the wide, now moving in. And by then I was dried up, and I was like, oh, he was saving it. I'm an idiot.
Right.
Because it is also thinking about that. It's like, you know, I love knowing about like what framing I'm in, and like, again, you just have to tweak the circumstances to be like, oh, I'm going to find an excuse to keep it really intimate, or I'm going to find an excuse to move more because of the shot you're in and stuff like that. I love knowing all of that stuff. And you can tell a real professional, I think, when they ask for just a little bit of information from the crew, and then they'll go back and their performance will be completely different. And sometimes in a way that you can't even see when I'm like standing in front of them, but then I'll go to Village later and watch it, and I'm like, oh, I get it now. That's the most infuriating part, where I really feel stupid, when I'm 2 inches away from like the most amazing acting I've ever seen in my entire life, and I'm like, I can't see anything. And then I'll go over and be like, that's how smart they are, is that they understand what the camera is doing in a way that is literally imperceptible, even if you were standing in front of them. I was really lucky during a film that I'm not allowed to promote right now.
Yeah.
I was working with am I allowed to mention actors' names? This really incredible actress in this movie, and I wasn't in the scene, so I was able to like kind of stand on set and watch her, and I was like, she's not really doing anything. And then the director was nice enough to let me go to Village, and I got to sit in the director's chair, which was fun, and have like a headset on, and I got to rewatch it when they were in this like extreme close-up of her eyes, and I was like, this is literal genius work.
100%. The person that I noticed this with more than I've ever encountered is Ken Watanabe on The Creator.
Really?
Because every time you do a push-in on his face, and then he just does this thing with his eyes, like, because he feels the camera coming in, and then he just does this like squinty thing. It's like an old cowboy movie.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, he knows exactly what he's doing. Like, that is somebody who's so in tune with that instrument, but it's not just in a vacuum. Like, it's directly in relation to what the camera is doing, but it feels authentic. Like, it doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel artificial. That's always the tricky part to me, I feel. I mean, I don't know anything about acting, but I don't know, that it's this very interesting to me, how y'all navigate this stuff.
It's so fascinating. I feel like despite like the Christian Bale camp, like it obviously makes sense that you need to be in tune with all those things, that you need to actually have like a understanding of it all and be like okay with it and comfortable with it and embrace it, because then that's how you achieve like those little nuanced performances that are so incredible. I mean, on a similar note, and we kind of touched on it, but I'm curious, this is something I think that a lot of DPs wonder. I personally definitely do, especially in a narrative context, maybe exclusively in a narrative context, but how do you navigate the amount of direction you're getting from a cinematographer? Like, do you prefer to kind of have the world sort of fade away and to sort of just be in your own element? Or how do you react when maybe like a cinematographer is being very prescriptive about where they want you to be and you're blocking? How do you navigate those things? Because I think for us on our end, it's like, I think really great DPs are able to anticipate the needs of an actor and are able to work within what's comfortable for an actor. But yeah, I'd love to just hear a little bit about your experience with that.
Yeah, I think that part of the interesting part of film is negotiating sort of what you need, what the director needs, what the cinematographer needs. And I don't mind the communication. I think that most of the time, and especially on bigger projects that I've been on, like people are very understanding of this. Like I'm not method or anything, but I'm definitely like, if we're about to do a take, like I'm focusing, so I get very like head down, and if you tell me something, I'll just sort of nod.
Yeah.
But that to me is like, I do not mind hearing it. It almost never bothers me, because I've learned how to prep over the years without like having someone be like, by the way, you need to be like 2 steps to the left, or like, can you like look slightly more to the right of the lens, or whatever it is. Like, it's totally fine. I'm registering it, but it's interesting when occasionally I go back and do like independent films where there's been situations where I can tell people are so nervous to talk to me because it does come off like I'm being sort of mean or whatever, and I'm like, I need to stay like 85% of my brain needs to stay in this, but I can use the rest of it to like internalize everything you're saying, but I might not be like, oh my God, yes, thank you so much, you know what I mean? Which isn't that I'm not okay with it, it's just that like the energy for like politeness and societal stuff is a little bit harder when you're trying to focus. If it's a big scene, if I'm gonna eat a burger and laugh, like we're probably fine with you being like,
which we had a scene like that.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
But no, I mean that's what's so tricky about it for me. Like part of the job of the DP is to facilitate, but also accommodate.
Right.
And navigating that sometimes is tricky because it's like sometimes the difference between a really great shot and like an okay shot is like just the slightest angle of the chin, right? So then, yeah, I've encountered what you're describing quite a bit, and I think that at the end of the day, like it just comes down to clear communication and understanding that everybody is like doing their process and not taking anything personal and like just communicating what you need and just being direct and straightforward. I could see how it's tricky for people to navigate it because when an actor's like in the moment and then you're like, but we could get the perfect take if you just turn your head like a little bit to the right, but I don't want to throw you off, and or when it's like some really minute like blocking minutia, like really detailed blocking minutia, like, oh well, we really need you to, I don't know, put the cup down but with the handle facing forward so that, I don't know, when it lands in frame, like you can read the logo, or just technical like blocky things that if I were an actor would drive me crazy. That kind of thing, like you have to put the cup down in this very specific way, in this specific angle, and act and deliver this scene and be in the moment and all of that. So,
well, I think that's why it's important I started listening to you guys' podcast actually because I'm like, I want to learn more because I don't know enough about, I've been doing this a long time and I know most of the things that like pertain to my job directly, but I want to know more because I do think that the more you understand other people's jobs, the more likely you are to be like, oh, this is why I need to do this, and this is of service to me because it's going to help the scene look good. Like, I know I've talked to actors before who've gotten frustrated. They're starting out or whatever, and they're like, I don't understand, like, why I have to stand here. And then later they see the shot and they're like, oh,
right.
And it makes sense, But that's why it's important to try to really get a grasp on everybody's job because then you understand why they're asking you to do the things that they're asking of you,
Yeah.
I recently had to work on a movie with like so much CGI, and that was a new one because it was like, can you curl your fingers like this around your weapon, Because when we're put it in, and that was like a whole new part of collaboration that I had never experienced before.
Yeah, that's hard to wrap your head around. I think as DPs, we kind of bump into that too. Like when you're in that kind of world where there's nothing there and you sort of just have to imagine.
That's going to be hard for you guys.
It's hard because lighting is real. Like lighting is environmental. Like lighting interacts with things, and it's not just abstract. So when you have to light an abstract space that is nondescript, but like is going to be turned into something specific later, it's really hard because you're like, okay, well, if this was real, like if this crazy CG thing was it reality, like if there was a giant planet or something that was like hovering above our planet, like the light that it would cast would do something like really specific. Yeah, you sort of just have to imagine it in a vacuum, and it's like really hard to get something authentic. I mean, the creator was interesting. Like, I'll talk about this more when the movie's out, but they did the opposite approach. Like the way that they did that movie was everything was designed after the fact. So like all the CG was designed after we shot, and it was designed to match what we filmed as opposed to
the other way around,
where you're trying to match something on set to something that doesn't exist yet.
That's
so
amazing.
It was sort of like, no, we're just going to like embrace this lived reality first, and then we're going to come up with the CG and stuff after the fact to match what we did on set.
That must have really been fun for you because I can imagine it's super hard to be like, okay, if the light is hitting the planet this way, how does that affect the light on the face of this astronaut or whatever?
Exactly. And that's the thing. So you just don't think about it. And then, and now you're just living in reality. And so it takes away the need to like do that kind of minutia, whether it's, holding your hand a certain way or lighting a scene a certain way. Because you're just like, oh no, we're just embracing reality first, and then everything, all that design stuff will come later. It's an interesting approach. It's not how it's usually done for various reasons, but
that is very in line with the way Gareth Edwards does everything else.
Yes. Oh, 100%.
I love that. That the experience I had with him, I'm like, that exactly follows.
Yeah.
I don't know. I love a through line. That's
It all connects.
So cool. Mackenzie, as someone who has faced some challenge with your sexual identity at different stages in your career, we're curious to hear what kind of advice you'd give to LGBTQ individuals who might be navigating similar situations, whether, actors, cinematographers, filmmakers in general, And do you feel at times like you needed to wear a mask or remain closeted to get work? And what was it like navigating that as an actress?
I mean, yeah, I did. I've talked about it a little bit in some other interviews, but yeah, I had a manager who was not supportive of who I was and how I wanted to present myself to the world, let's say. And I was essentially being like set up to be like a Disney Channel actress. Like I was encouraged to lose a lot of weight. I was meeting with a coach who talked to me about how to dress, and even went to go see someone at one point, all through the representation that I had at the time, to make my voice higher. So it was all about like feminizing me, because it was like, oh, you have a baby doll face and we can capitalize on that if we make you into this person. And some of it was not done like consciously, because I wasn't out right away. So some of it wasn't like with the knowledge of trying to make me more straight, but they were trying to make me more heteronormative.
Right.
You know, when I showed up to acting school from France, you know, I came from the punk scene and I was closeted, but I looked probably a lot closer to what I look like right now, even though like I'm not going to sit here and pretend that there isn't still homophobia and transphobia and all this other stuff in this business. Like there absolutely is. But I think your authenticity, despite what people tell you, is more powerful than that. Like sort of clicking out of the matrix and getting in touch with who you really are and what you care about is actually more powerful than any roadblocks anybody can put in front of you. So I would encourage anybody who's, you know, LGBTQ, who's a part of the film industry or wants to be a part of the film industry, like take it at your own pace. Like for a long time, I felt bad of being closeted so long and lying to people, but I think that that's the journey I had to go on. And I know some people who still don't like to talk about it publicly, and you are absolutely in your right to do that. I think I wouldn't encourage anybody to live a certain way, but I would encourage you to be honest with yourself, because to create great art, you first need to be honest with yourself. And then how that affects everything else, that's up to you.
So beautiful.
I love that. And we're so grateful that you are able and interested and open to talking about it. You know, Peter and I are both queer, and I can speak for myself at least, like even behind the camera, I have sort of struggled a little bit over the years before settling on where I'm at with it now, of like how open to be and how much do I mention it and how much do I make it like an intrinsic part of my identity versus like just sort of a background thing. Because in my mind, like it should just be like, oh, and also this.
Yeah.
But we don't live in that world yet. And I think especially for an actor, like it can be really it must be really challenging. It's like we're not quite there yet, are we?
I worked with a person who basically told me to lie in interviews about my orientation. And I was told by this other person, like, wow, that's insane, because you would think, you know, in this day and age, that's definitely like a perk. Like that should help you. And I was like, you really think we're living in the future, don't you? Like it hurt me to be told to lie in interviews about that, which I chose not to. But it was even more wild that when I talked to certain people about it, they seemed to think that like we lived in a world where racism and homophobia and all this stuff like just was a thing of the past, you know? And I was like, I don't know, that was kind of baffling to me.
Yeah, I think that's the other side of it too. Like the other toxic side of it, unfortunately, is that like we were talking to someone last week on the show about like how, yeah, like on film sets, there is kind of this air of like, you just kind of have to be macho and like you enter spaces and you kind of have to be like, you have to put on a mask essentially to some extent. But then like if you take that to the other extreme, like what you're kind of talking about a little bit, it's like you also don't want to be pigeonholed for being queer. Yeah. And so it's this dance for sure. And I think what it all comes back to though, and what you said so beautifully, is just about like respecting, caring for yourself, being patient with yourself, and hoping that you're surrounded by people who understand that and who will treat you as equally as possible, give you the same opportunities, but at the same time not necessarily like pigeonhole you or anything. I guess I'm a little curious, like now that you're fully in your identity, like have you experienced any of that kind of like, oh, I don't necessarily want to only do those roles or anything like that, or how's that been?
Choosing to like present in a way that feels more right to me has been sometimes difficult, because there are certain roles that you lose out on, and to a certain extent, some of them make complete sense, you know? Like some, you know, I want to play a lot of different types of roles, but there are some things that are just more in my wheelhouse, and I totally accept that.
Right.
But I think that it is hard sometimes to know that maybe the view of what a character is supposed to look like is kind of narrow. But I will say, I do really believe that like what passes you is not for you. So like I'm not going to sit here and pretend that like living authentically doesn't come at a price. Like you're going to lose out on things. But I think that the people that you'll gain that are in your camp and willing to back you are worth 10 times anything that you lose out on. That's the silver lining, I think.
Yeah. Do you think things have gotten better in regards to actors being out and sort of still being able to like navigate multiple roles? Like, are we on the right track? Or are things a little better?
I think they are, but I don't think progress is linear. I think there's a little bit of 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's all part of this sort of larger state of things for LGBTQ people, like in society outside of the industry.
Yeah,
like it is intrinsically related to that, and it's so interesting and kind of darkly funny that you mention people sort of living in this fantasy land that like, oh, we're in the future and like everything's fine now and racism and homophobia is solved, and there's a darker side of that, which is unfortunate that a lot of people harbor this feeling, but that LGBTQ people or like trans people, for example, have like outsized power and status in society that like actually we need to knock them down a peg.
Yeah, I think that's what shocked me about that statement was it wasn't even like, oh, I thought that homophobia was kind of gone now. It was like, oh, I thought you guys were killing it.
Right, you know? Exactly.
Which, yeah, we are, but also...
yeah, it's complicated. It's like we are, but also like half the states in the country are like passing anti-LGBTQ laws, like, and rights are going backwards. So,
and there's not a single person who's queer, even if it's a small situation, who hasn't run into something on set where something's been said or something happened. You know, I don't know a single queer person who hasn't encountered something. Yeah. We are doing better, 100%. Like now, I do think there's systems in place where you can like talk to people about it and stuff like that. Why do you feel like it's getting better or worse?
I think with actors, yes. Like I from an outsider's perspective, like I might be wrong, but I feel like sometimes when I get lost in thoughts of sadness about the state of the world, like it is helpful to step back and remember, like, oh, I mean, like literally 20 years ago, nobody could be out as an actor. Like it would kill your career. Yeah. I mean, it would literally like you would never work again. And many careers in the 90s and early 2000s were torched as a result of that. Whereas now I think part of what broke it down is social media and just like the more accessibility to actors directly, like as just regular people, which I think is interesting because it also ties into the SAG-AFTRA strike and everything. Like it's actually all connected for me. It's like breaking down this barrier. Like I think part of why people were so pigeonholed up until the mid 2000s is because like everything about what you learned about an actor or celebrity or person like went through a very specific system of there's like tabloids, publications, like there was this barrier between everything, and they decided the narrative. And since the advent of social media and celebrities using it and everything, it's like there is this ability, and again, it's not solved, it's not perfect, but there has been this breakdown of that barrier where somebody can just say, no, I mean, like, this is who I am, like, this is what's going on with me, and it is what it is, and, you know, take it or leave it, and then if people like them, then they take it, and if you don't like it, then you leave it, but it's not, at least it's not filtered through, like, an outsider's baggage of, like, no, this means X and Y, and this means so-and-so and such about, like, what an actor is or can do or whatever. So I like to think that it's gotten a little bit better and that we've seen, like there is a younger generation of sort of out queer actors that exists now that did not used to exist. If we look back on just how forced into the closet people were, like even, 20 years ago, even 15 years ago.
Yeah,
like,
the fact that even being out as an option is
exactly. Mackenzie, we're going to get to the end of the interview here in a second, but just wanted to leave on this note and ask, as somebody who's worked on both big budget movies and TV shows, as well as small indie films like the one we did together, do you have a preference of one over the other? What are the sort of advantages and disadvantages that you see in the different tiers of sort of scale and budget that you've worked in, and do you like one more than the other?
I mean, if you work on like a big budget film, obviously like I think the support for developing your character is amazing, like, dialect coaches and, fight training, which I've been lucky to do a few times and stuff like that. And then a smaller film, it's more rough and tumble. The holding is maybe like somebody's bedroom and you're all crowded there with your water bottles, but it also kind of feels like camp.
Yeah.
So I don't think I've worked on both, and I think that what comes down to is the people that you're working with and the quality of the story you're trying to tell, and how passionate people are about that story. That's what makes the difference between a great film set and an okay film set. It isn't always the budget, I would say, at least for my personal experience. It's the people and caring about the story that you're trying to tell.
Yeah, I love that. And as a follow-up, what kinds of projects would you like to be working on or do more of in the future?
I don't know, because I used to be very artsy, and I still want to do... I like that a lot of the TV shows I've done have been more... I don't know, like heavy hitter TV shows. But then recently I've gotten a taste of like what it's like to like fight train for a role and like do all this stuff. So I don't know, that sounds fun too. I feel like recently my conception of like what exactly my career is going to look like has gotten kind of blown out of the water. And now I just want to do all of it. So I don't know. I think I just want to keep moving to whatever excites me creatively and see where that takes me, like follow that thread. I think that's what most people should do, whether you're, behind the camera or in front of it.
I love it. Mackenzie, thank you so much. I'm honestly inspired by your energy and everything that you're doing. And this was such a wonderful time. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, guys.
Woo! This episode of the Cinematography Salon podcast was produced by Peter Pascucci, Oren Soffer, and David Kruta, with original music by One Wave. We created this episode in partnership with the Cinematography Salon, and we would like to extend a special thanks to the salon community for sourcing topics for this episode. If you enjoyed listening to the episode, we encourage you to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on social media to stay up to date with our latest episodes and news. Thanks.